Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I wanted to share a situation which is current, a situation which is current and is important for us to reflect upon. I wanted to share with you the situation that just came to my attention with regard to a family situation. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I'm going to give enough information so that we look at ourselves and we come to a point where we have to struggle to make a determination. That doesn't mean we're going to change overnight, but at least the rules to the game, so to speak, in which we decide to engage the world with, even if we find ourselves falling short, are the rules that are determined by the values of Islam. I just received a phone call from a friend of mine who was looking for help for a sister who's traveling with 5 children. And a couple of those children are sick. They have conditions, physical conditions which qualify them to be disabled. This sister, whatever the details were, found herself in a situation in which there's some sort of domesticality, or domestic issues, I should say, domestic violence, and she found herself in the street. And then she finds herself in a situation where wherever she turns with regard to the Muslim community thus far, she finds herself in a situation in which she can't get any support, right? And so something is obviously wrong in the community, that our familial structure is reaching a level of instability, where we are finding our children and our women in the streets. Some may say, well, that's kind of male chauvinist. Okay, we're finding Muslim women and Muslim children in the streets. That's extremely problematic. In these types of situations, what is a possible scenario is that in that type of situation, that family can lose custody of those children. If those children are not sheltered within 24 hours, that means those children can technically be considered homeless. And not being able to shelter your children, especially if they have medical conditions, constitutes a reason for the state to intervene. Because now those children are put in harm's way. To intervene and take those children and put them into the system. And once they go into the system, if there's no one that can be found immediately to take care of those children, then those children will go into foster care, right? We need to wake up, oh Muslims. Some people at times don't like the orientation that we come from, but we need to wake up. Also, the Muslims themselves offer no shelter to people in these types of situations. And guess what? At the end of the day, even the system won't provide shelter. You're going to find that the way that the situation is, that it's become so problematic that in order to find shelter, you have to go through such a tight criteria that you may find yourself waiting 24 hours, before you can even find shelter. And that's the condition that we're in today's times. And so, we really need to look at ourselves. We really need to look at ourselves and stop trying to run from what we have become. And the more that we look at ourselves, the better position that we're in to be able to do something for ourselves. But if we don't want to acknowledge the situation that we're in, if we don't want to acknowledge how problematic it has become, then we'll never have the capacity to be able to move forward. And let me tell you something, it's a tragedy when Muslim children are lost into the system, right? Because not only does it scar them, it scars all children across the board. But now we're just going to focus on the issue of Muslim children. But we find that very few people will take them in from the Muslim community, right? And so what begins to happen is that their identity is torn down because many Muslims don't believe in the whole concept of foster care as a substitute for adoption, or they don't believe in the concept of legal adoption. And and what happens is that the children, are lost in the system. And we have seen some noble efforts on the part of some Muslim brothers. I know a case where a Muslim brother, he went and he rescued a whole family of children from just being lost in the system, and it had nothing to do with his family at all. They were just Muslim children that were lost in the system. A Muslim brother, an indigenous brother, went and actually opened his home and took the responsibility of pulling those children out of the system. And we have some Muslims like that, but we have a lot of Muslims that won't even pay attention. They don't even understand how dire the situation is. Forget about the adults. Think about the children and the responsibility that we have to children, Muslim children. If we say that we're an ummah, if we say that we're community, if we say that we believe in La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah, so leadership should be planning for situations that are like this. Situations which are dire, in which it's now you have to deal with the crisis of the community. A lot of people want to take leadership when it is a situation in which they can collect the money for the community. A situation in which is just organizing events. But when it comes to actually dealing with the sicknesses that are in the community, then you begin to see a very hands-off approach from Masajid and from many other institutions, right? And so we really need to look at our condition and where this has gone to. And let me tell you something. This is something that's taking place right now as we speak. This situation is taking place right now as we speak. And so there's a necessity to really think about what's going on and think about how we can change the situation. And it's a multi-tiered situation that we're in, and it is a multi-tiered solution that we need, right? And that's going to be the way that we're going to be able to move forward. But once the family becomes destabilized to the point where people are exposed to the elements in that way, exposed to the cold, exposed to the system, we're in bad shape. We at that point in time, we lose our dignity and our honor as a community, because we should be in a position where we can intervene. That's the least that we can do. We should be in a position where we can intervene, but we don't like to deal with those types of issues. It reminds us about the problems of poverty. It reminds us of human failure. It reminds us of, the side of life where things become so problematic. We don't like to intervene in that. But guess what? The system has to take up that burden. The system will take up that burden in one way or another. Everyone is focused on power, but we're not looking at, okay, the system, because it deals with power, understand that at some point in time it's going to have to deal with situations like that, because you can't just have families in the street. Somehow or some way, you're going to have to address that. And when it becomes too problematic, then it flips over or folds over into the problem of homelessness that we see and the crisis of the situation that we see, right? But, Muslims, we need to wake up. We really need to wake up. We're not talking about perfection here. We're not talking about being perfect people. We're talking about just basic safety now. Basic safety, what we're seeing is families lose that. And a lot of times that has to do with the way the husband and wife deal with each other. And in a scenario like this, brothers, it's incredible that, it's incredible that we see men that will throw the families out on the street. This is not the first time that I heard of this. Actually, within this month, I heard of 2 scenarios like this. Where brothers will throw sisters out in the street with the children and try to stay in the home, right, and to make sure that they're okay. But then the family, the progeny is exposed to all of that. That's extremely problematic, people. That's extremely problematic. And again, we can say, we're not bashing brothers in this instance, but there is, in this situation, it just happens to be that, you ask a lot of questions, like how it is that you have a sister rolling in the streets with 5 kids, and they're exposed to the elements, and there's no address. There's no, who do you call? The Muslim? You call the masjid turns people away. You call the father doesn't respond, in these types of scenarios. And so, we're in a crisis. And Muslims better wake up. Muslims are too busy critiquing the Shia, the Nation of Islam, this and that. And everyone else is organizing themselves. Everyone else is trying to look at how they can deal with their affairs. You know what I'm saying? Sunni Muslims are too focused on critiquing others rather than looking at ourselves, and seeing how we can be what we claim to be. خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. Right? We claim that ayah of the Quran is a descriptive of us. And at this point, I mentioned here, I want to close out on this. It's not a condemnation of us. I'm not into condemning us. And some brothers mistake what I say and they think it's a condemnation, but it's not. It's an addressing of a situation which will collapse us as a community. Right? And that's my job as an imam, as an educator in the community, whether people like it or not. That's my job. To be able to look at the community's needs and put them on the table and say, what can we do as a whole? What I do on a personal level, is one thing to bring solutions. But these types of things need a communal consciousness so that we think differently about them. And that's the fundamental problem that we have, that we don't have a communal collective consciousness. And everyone is trying to compete with the other person or trying to put down the other person. And that's a toxic mentality. We should be looking at ourselves and seeing and taking account of ourselves, seeing where our deficits are and how we can regroup and address our issues, right? In bringing up ourselves in a general way, I'm not necessarily identifying a particular group of people in this instance. I'm talking about us as a collective, right? And if it applies to you. If it doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to you. But we're still all involved because we're part of this ummah. So that becomes the issue, that we have to look at ourselves and what it is, that allows us, sadd al-faraj, as we say, close the gaps. If the line has gaps in it, the imam is supposed to say, close the gaps. And that's the same thing. If in our community there's gaps and there's issues, the leadership is supposed to say, look, there's gaps. Let's close the gaps, right? The leadership in this case is not only vested in the person of the imam, but even if something goes wrong in the salah line, the person from the back, whether male or female, can indicate when it is that the imam went wrong. Either subhanallah or the clap of the hand, as we do. We have our way. That's also indicative of the fact that every believer, male or female, should signal back to the community and back to the leadership, to each other where it is that we have the gaps, but because we criticize each other in the way that we do, without having a sense of priority, this power of being able to speak back to the community in the call and response mode, this ability that we should have, it has been weakened because we have divided ourselves, right? And that's what the ayah of the Quran says, that if there's differences, that we will fail. فَتَفَشَّلُوا وَتَذْهَبْ رِيحُكُمْ. Right? So, and the Quran commands us, لَا تَنَزَعُوا. Right? Don't fall into a dispute which will collapse you internally, because then you will be a failure. You will fail in your ability to do things. Your power of effectiveness and execution will go from you. It will leave from you. Right? And that basic momentum that you need to have as a community will leave. And that's where we're at, people. That's where we're at. But it has gone beyond that. It's gone to the point now where our children are exposed. Our people are exposed. The most vulnerable of us are exposed to the elements on more than one type of situation and scenario. And no one wants to talk about these issues. No one wants to talk about these issues from the angle of like, look, there's something wrong. We should all say, yes, it's wrong. We should reflect upon it, or we should be quiet if we don't know, but we should reflect upon it and say, no, we're better than that. We should have a higher standard of how we're dealing with each other. Because this is one aspect of the family problem that we see. There's other issues. This is an outcome of the family problems that we have before us. And I don't want to go further than that because I wanted to stop, but I want to at least get that complete idea. Everybody is responsible in this case, in the sense of creating a higher standard, in the sense of demanding that we have solutions. We're spending 5 million, 10 million on buildings, and we don't even have shelters or even temporary housing for when our own people act stupid. That's the reality at the end of the day. Or people are victims. We expect the Christians and others to take up the brunt for the Muslim community. And then we want to talk about how honored we are. It's ridiculous. Let me end right here, and encourage, please make dua. Make dua. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. A lot of people are suffering, but it's very, very distressing, to see that. And the women, they're calling around asking the men for support, in these types of situations, and we're finding that the men are not stepping up. And unfortunately too, this is one of the problems also, when women, are also, they want to do their own thing. Now we have a battle of the sexes going on in the Muslim community versus having a community that's organized with leadership and clarity and the ability to address issues. We're infighting in the home and with each other. I want to end here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.